Hey everybody, it's Scott Detweiler here, back with another thrill-packed episode of Couch to Photoshop. And today we're going to cover what is probably the last core component you have to know before we move on to more complicated grounds. And it's one that I consider to be probably one of the most powerful tools in all of Photoshop, and that is the curve and or level. And I say it that way because curves and levels do pretty much the exact same thing, although they have a little bit different interface, and curves do offer a slight bit more functionality. But again, if you're looking for what a curve really does at its core, both tools will work. And we'll talk about both briefly. So you can kind of compare the two interfaces. But I will tell you, curves is probably the one that you're going to want to focus on at the end of the day. Because if you're getting into compositing or you wanted to get into things that are a little bit more complicated, curves give you more capability. Okay, so let's first of all talk about what the curve is. Now, the curve is, we're going to use the adjustment layer curve. So if you click on your adjustment layer menu and go to curves, it will bring up your menu. This is not to be confused with image adjustment curves. This tool applies the curve directly to the image, the background layer. In this case, it's on this curve. This is a destructive tool, and once you apply this change, you can't change it. That's why the adjustment layer is so much better, because if we make a change here, we can always go back and modify it later. By the way, a little tiny gotcha, when you're playing with curves on your own, and I assume you're opening an image at home and working on something, which I highly recommend you do, you're going to want to click on the curve instead of the mask. The mask is comes free with the layer, and it will be selected by default. You're going to want to click on this because some of these tools, if you start to play around when we're done with the video and you want to work with the tool a little bit more to get familiar with it, you're going to find that you get a lot of white showing up in this because it's sampling from the curve and not the layer below. So just a little tiny gotcha there. Okay, so what we're looking at here is basically the histogram of this image. So the histogram, if you're not familiar with it, the darkest dark lives in this corner and the lightest light lives up here. And this straight line represents the change we have introduced to the data. And the data is this weird shadow thing we got going in the background here. And the way that this histogram works is the height is how much of that specific tonal range you have. If I click on this little tool here, it will allow me to hover over the image and show you on the curve where this data lives. And you see that little tiny box kind of hovering in the bottom left there of the curve. That's the background. Under her brassiere here, for example, is almost pure black. Her skin kind of in the almost one stop short of perfect white. Our cheek is very bright, kind of halfway through the brightest stop there. So you can see that all of these parts of this image are represented by the data that lives back in here. For example, her skin lives kind of in here, but all that shadow and all the background, all under her brassiere and the background, all live kind of here, which is why it's so tall. We're not really going to care about that. I'm just going to tell you that right away. You're rarely going to look at the curve that's back there. What you are going to care about is this line. So what happens with this line is if we click on it and we push up or down, we're kind of saying we want this middle here to be darker, or we want the middle to be brighter. Now you see that it's moving this whole line like a rubber band, and we can stop that from happening by actually adding additional points. So I could just tap here and I could just tap here, for example. And now I can move the middle up or the middle down, and it's not so much affecting the brightest parts of her skin, for example, and it's not so much affecting the shadows. And you can make some pretty weird things go happen here, but if you follow the simple rule of trying to keep it in an S shape or a C shape, you'll be fine. You also want to avoid making things that are flat. For example, if we flatten this out completely, you're going to find that we make gray, and that's your middle gray. If we reverse this, make the darkest light and the lightest dark, we get a negative. So you basically can affect everything about your image tonally from this one graph. As I say, a nice S curve is usually very pleasant. So down a little bit in the shadows and up a little bit in the highlights. This is a contrast curve, and a very simple one. Your camera does this for you when you take a picture. It applies the contrast curve quickly so you can look at the preview in the back of your camera. And if you ever notice when you're loading it in Lightroom or Capture One that the previews all get replaced, they kind of disappear and are replaced with something else. And you're probably going, wait, I liked that one. What are you doing? It's actually regenerating that curve based on some settings that you have in your raw processor inside of your computer versus the one the camera uses, which does not have as many options. So creating a curve is actually pretty cool. And there's a lot of things you can do stylistically to this. For example, I'm going to reset my curve. That's what this button here does. I like to raise the blacks. So if I just pull up on this, and what I'm doing is I'm telling it that the blackest black is now 11 or some odd points above 0. 0 would be perfect black, and 255 would be white. So it's like just like 15 or something like that. And now down here, we don't have a pure black anymore. There's no pure black anywhere on this image. And I think this, I like this look quite a bit. And this is kind of the start of a painterly appeal to me. I find my painterly images work best when the blacks have been lifted. Now, the other things we want to pay attention to here are these little sliders here. This represents where the clipping of white will occur, and this represents where the clipping of black will occur. And so if you move this in, you'll see that it's actually drawing a line there, and it's basically saying all the data from this point to the left is going to be discarded. We're not really going to use it, and you're going to see that it turns into that 15 gray that we've got there. The same thing on this side. If we pull it over, it's saying everything on this side is going to be discarded. And you see where that starts to become a problem because we've lost all this data in through here. And if you look in the graph there, you can see it's showing you that we are off the reservation. So all that information is lost. Oftentimes, if you're looking to kind of get the brightest possible image that you would like, you can pull these in until you see that we're starting to kind of clip into the data. Now, if you're like, well, I can't really see that graph, that's hard. You can actually hold down your Alt or Option key and you click on this. It will show you what is being clipped as you're moving. So you can also do this trick in Lightroom, by the way. So if you did not know that, very cool way to kind of make sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck. Same with the dark side of this. You can pull it over and it'll show you what areas have been lost. Now, another cool part of this, by the way, you can do this, click and hold this button, will do preview. So if you want to say, hey, what am I doing? Another cool thing is the auto button. Now, unlike most things in photography, the auto button here actually works well. So if we click auto, you will see that it'll go and it'll make some significant changes to this image. You're like, wow, that looks a lot different. What are all these rainbow lines for? And that's because each color, the red, the green, and the blue, your camera actually uses a filter that takes a red, a green, actually two greens, and a blue. Most cameras actually work in black and white, and they use a thing called a Bayer array to determine what actually is color. And you're allowed to go and modify these things later. So the red curve here has been brought down a bit, meaning that it wants to add more cyan to the image. So if you pull this down, it's adding more cyan to this image. And you can curve this just like you can anything else. We want to have more red in the highlights and more cyan in the shadows, for example. Now you're starting to get into kind of a stylistic looking thing. And this is just the red curve. So I'm going to go to green. Up would be more magenta, or more green, I'm sorry, and down would be more magenta. So you can get into making some weird things there too, like if we want more magenta in our shadows. And then we can go to blue last. And I am totally making a train wreck of this thing, but just so you understand, Auto did all this for us. And you're thinking, well, I really don't like what Auto did. How is that handy? Well, the cool thing about Auto is you can change its behavior. If you Alt-click or Option-click on Auto, it will tell you how it wants to behave. One of the things I like to uncheck is this Snap Neutral Midtones, and you'll see that it doesn't now mess with the middle of this graph so much and allows me to kind of keep my skin tones, which tend to live in that area. But you can change the behavior, so enhance the monochromatic contrast, and then again that snap option. Enhance the per channel, that would be each channel, the red, the green, and the blue, all getting their maximum amount of contrast, pulling them in as far as they can be pulled in on either side, the black and the white side. And then define the dark and light colors, which is exactly what we used to do the hard way is hold down the Alt or Option key and find what was clipping, and then use these eyedropper tools here to try and tell curves where the lightest and darkest and gray areas of our image existed. And it's just hard. It was just hard work, and it took a lot of time to find those things. And now it's all automated. You can just go in here and click on this. And then brightness and contrast. So most of the time I prefer this one. And the nice thing about this is that it's not something that you have to make a choice on right now, but it does give you a point of departure for creative approaches to your imagery. So when we are editing our curve, we can edit all the red, the green, or the blue, or we edit the RGB, which is the luminosity or the brightness of the image. It's not affecting the colors, it's affecting the whole brightness of the image. So that's why I like to raise my grays or my blacks in here, for example, and then maybe give it a bit of a curve this way. By the way, if you use the brightness slider, that's more or less what this is doing. The thing you want to avoid when you're moving this, there's a couple things you want to avoid. One is you move it up too high, you'll see that it kind of sticks to the ceiling, or if you move it too low, it kind of sticks to the floor. That means that you're basically flattening out and losing that information. So we don't want to do that. We also want to avoid making flat things, as I discussed before, because those areas will be gray, and that's terrible. You also don't want to go upside down. If you ever have any downhill areas, that means that those areas will be negative. So try not to make things that are too dramatic that direction. So I'm going to undo, and I'm going to hit auto again just for giggles, and we'll start here. All right, so that's kind of the quick and dirty of how this works. So if we get rid of this and we go and we grab a level, levels kind of works the same way. We have our white and our black points on either side. If we click and hold, we can do that same trick with this stuff. This is where we want our middle, and that's more or less that big point that we're moving up and down in the middle of the graph. But we can't create multiple points here, and that's the part that kind of I find to be, what do we call it, limiting here. We can also set how much of this we want to include. For example, we want our blacks to be 15 points off the bottom, like how we talked about before. That's what this is doing. So it's kind of the same creature, but to me, it just doesn't have the same ability. Like if I want to add a contrast to this, I can't really do it from here. But for a quick and dirty change to an image, black point, white point, and maybe some adjustments to exposure, this is a fine tool, but I prefer the curve. Okay, so now let's show how to use that in conjunction with the mask. So let's focus on the hair here. First of all, I'm just going to kind of do an auto, but I'm going to alt click and undo the snap neutral midtones because I like this, and hit OK. So this is my point of departure. And then I'm going to create another curve here. And in this case, maybe I want to play with the hair a little bit. I want to add a little bit more contrast to the hair. So I'm just going to kind of go and make a little bit of an S curve here. I want to be careful not to go too bright because, again, we can create a problem where we clip when we try and print the image or so on. But just something along these lines. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to invert this mask. We talked about that before. It's Control-I or Command-I on your keyboard. So now it is a black mask. Hit B for brush and make it a bit bigger. I want 100% flow. And so we talked about adjusting the brush using the Alt right click on the PC or the Alt Option left click on the Mac. So you can adjust the brush size and hardness quickly. And what I want to do is I want to paint with white in her hair. And I'm just going to I'm going to make sure I'm painting with white on this here. And I'm just going to go and add this little bit of whatever. And you're like, well, I don't see anything there. If we go and we can change this mask after we've applied it, we can go and make some adjustments. By the way, you notice how choppy this graph is showing. It's actually showing what areas I have highlighted with the brush, the areas of this that matter for this mask. But you see it's all choppy. That's what this warning sign is here. It's telling you the histogram is not accurately generated, and you can click to make a better histogram. But again, do we care? Are you looking at that graph? I'm not really looking at the graph. I'm looking more or less at this. There are times I look at the graph, but not typically. Okay, so I like that. And now let's do one more. And so this one was the hair. This is the overall. And then this one we're going to do color grading. So here, what I want to do is start with the blues. I tend to like a little bit of blue in my shadows. So I will move this up a bit here to add blue into the darkest areas and kind of bring this down so it doesn't go too much into there. Like I don't want interference with the brighter areas having a blue cast of them. So if we go down too far, it gets too yellow. So I'm going to put that point right there and help it kind of guard this curve from being disturbed too much by my goofing around down here. Okay, and then I'm going to go and look at the red channel. And again, if you want to get creative with this and just kind of move things around, you can always make the change later. It isn't like it's permanent. It is just an adjustment layer. So maybe something like that. And in the green, I don't tend to do a lot in the green area, in truth. This curve can make people look pretty sick pretty fast. If you don't like a point, by the way, pick it and you can drag it right off the screen and it will get rid of it. Okay, so that's my color grade. So I can before and after on that. I like that. However, I do want to make one change here. I do, again, like those blacks lifted, and I think we did that. Nope, we didn't do that yet. I'll lift that here just a bit and make this kind of save. All right, so before and after. It's subtle, and I like it. So to save this, to say I want to use this again and again, you can go up here under presets, and you can save yourself a preset, or you can select your presets from here, but you can save it up here. So you can save your curve preset. And that will give you the ability to pull this up on any other document you're working in. If you like the look of this, I say, wow, I really like that, that look and that feel. This is where the starts of creating your own actions and your own kind of stylistic interpretation of images starts, is right in there. So this tool is amazingly handy when we get into compositing later, because the black points of many images we combined will probably not be the same. There might be color casts in those shadows, and there are other ways to remove those, and we're going to talk about that in another episode as well, because there's an adjustment layer, very handy for that type of compositing. But it doesn't really affect the black and white points as easily as you can inside of curves. So that's pretty much it for today, and I hope this was helpful. Again, we're getting into the nitty-gritty now. We've got most of our bases covered, and it's going to get a little bit harder from here on out, because if you don't have a grasp on the basics, I highly recommend you go back, because or I'm going to lose you pretty fast as we come up on selections, because we're going to come back and touch on all of these tools, and I'm not going to go over them again and again each time. So selections will probably be our next one, and selections is quite a beast. So there's going to be actually a couple videos on that one as well, and we're going to get into actually creating some art and make some projects out of these things so we can see how these tools all work together. So once again, thank you for watching. If you would be so kind as to give the video a like, I would greatly appreciate it. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I will catch you next time.